This meeting is being recorded.
Ooh,
Okay. Yes. Get on to Justin. Here we go.
Here we are. All right. So let me first share my screen. That would be good. You could see my presentation. We'll hit play. Okay. I am going to begin by saying that I am getting over a case of bronchitis. So I am hoping that there won't be a lot of coughing. I do have hot tea here. I've been drinking it for the past half hour, getting ready. Actually, my voice is pretty good. If I have a fit, I may mute for a second, get a sip of tea or water. I've got both and take a cough drop, but I am on the mend. Also, one of the reasons why we didn't do this in person is because I haven't really been feeling up to moving very much. It was a grueling week for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm muting everyone from my end. I hope you don't mind, just because two reasons, one of which is sometimes I hear myself come back through your mic and it's really distracting. And secondly, I do have two videos I'm going to try. And if you guys are not on mute, we hear the reverberation on it. So I just muted everybody. Later on at the end of the talk, happy to unmute people for Q&A for sure. All right, so let me get started. What you are seeing here is probably one of the most infamous shipwrecks in the United States, period, end of story. Not just the Bronx, but it is the General Slocum, which we will talk about. We're going to go chronologically. I'm going to deal with 5 wrecks. There are hundreds to go with, but these are the best, most in-depth stories that we have, and probably the highest profile wrecks of the Bronx. I'm also going to begin by talking a little bit about why, especially the waterways of the East Bronx, mainly the East River and the Long Island Sound, are so dangerous. And they still to this day are, mainly because of a body of water that begins in Upper Manhattan and stretches its way to the Bronx, which some of you may be very familiar with, called Hellgate. And this is a modern picture of Hellgate with the Hellgate Bridge, which is now operated by Amtrak. You could see where my cursor is, North Brother and South Brother Island. They are all going to come into play at some point in most of the wrecks I'm going to talk about today. So let's talk a little bit about Hellgate, where it comes from, well, where the name comes from. It comes from glacial drift, obviously. But the name Hellgate was considered to be a corruption of the Dutch phrase Heljegat or Hejegat, which was most likely first assigned to the body of water by this man, Adrian Block. Adrian Block made his first expedition on behalf of the Dutch West India Company in 1614. And it was a 2-year process because he came over on a ship called the Tiger, which burned off the coast of Manhattan. He spent a year living in Manhattan with the help of the natives. He built his second ship, which we'll see here, which is called the Unrust. And the Unrust literally translates to unrest because he spent a very, very haphazard and very fraught year on Manhattan trying to get off of Manhattan. And this is a replica, by the way, of the Unrust. With the Unrust, he was able to chart most of the New England East Coast, which you'll see here on this map. He is the first to depict Long Island as an island, mainly because of his experience with Hellgate. It is also believed that he was the one who, sorry, I'm going to go back to that just for a second. He was the one who named North Brother and South Brother Island, which both were claimed by the Dutch West India Company in 1614, and originally named Der Gesellen, which meant either could be translated to the companions or brethren in English. And again, I am not the best at Dutch pronunciations. For all these years I've been talking about the Dutch, you'd think I'd get better trying. But he is the one who has claimed the names of the brothers, as we will again talk more about the brothers a little bit later on. So this is one of the earliest depictions of the Hellgate region from the late 17th century. and you talk to people who navigate the East River and the waters around the Bronx and Randall's Island and Ward's Island, and even today they say that the currents of Hellgate are dangerous. They still, one person who patrols New York Harbor on a 36-foot wooden boat for a riverkeeper basically said it's a boisterous place. This is actually a quote. There are whirlpools, and the wind against the tide causes interesting, short, aggressive waves. You pay attention when you're in Hellgate. And of course, I'm going to show you a lot of these historical images, and a lot of them seem to almost depict the opposite of what I'm talking about. They look bucolic. They look very, very peaceful. They're not. They're very boisterous waters. And we'll learn more about that in a second. Here is from the 1830s, a depiction of Hellgate, and you'll see you've got both now steam and you've got wind-powered sail, all sort of in this soupy mess trying to navigate around, again, what looks like a very calm region, but isn't very calm at all. And I'm going to explain why. And actually, I took this from Claude Rust's book about the burning of the Slocum, and he describes the Hellgate tides really well. And you can see on this description just how complicated these tides are. By the way, this is more a modern-ish depiction of Hellgate. Obviously, Randall's Island and Ward's Island today are joined together. Little Hellgate really doesn't exist very much anymore, but the Bronx Kills is still there, obviously. But Claude Rust says this: when the tides rise on the eastern seaboard, it sets New York Harbor and further to the northeast into Long Island Sound. At New York Bay, it splits at the tip of Manhattan, one current pushing up against the Hudson and through the Harlem River, the other entering the East River. Here, with the horizontal movement impeded by the opposite flow of the Harlem River and the narrowness of the channel up to the Sound, the huge basin of the Hellgate begins to fill. The waters, like wild beasts, circle their confines, impatient for a chance to escape. The downcoming flow of the Harlem River is then stopped by the strength of the escaping currents and sent back up through Little Hellgate and the Bronx Kills and the channels to the west like a sluiceway. It's filled, and swift seething water races up to the Bronx shore. Now, I'm going to stop there just to say that this is very
brought that up to 64%.
for a lot of the just going to mute very important for a lot of the wrecks that we're going to talk about today is the idea of being sort of pushed out on this tide towards the Bronx. This flow builds up for hours, building up to a high tide along the East River shore. Then at a time when other water settled into the slack, the downcoming tide, which has been delayed 4 hours by the distance and the drag of the Long Island Basin, begins its relentless drive, and the struggle for mastery is on. So basically, within the time period of tides, there's always something boiling and circling going on at Hellgate. There's never a calmer period. There is when the tides are higher, it's slightly calmer and safer to go through, but even then it's challenging for most people who are even experienced in navigating these waters. All right, so with that, I know it was a very confusing description because as you could see by the directions of the arrows, there's a lot going on there. This is a depiction of Hellgate in 1776, and actually this is going to be important because the first wreck we're going to talk about will be a direct result of Hellgate in 1780, 4 years later. And again, what you're seeing here in these drawings is what looks like almost to be something placid and beautiful looking, but don't be deceived. We're going to move on and talk about the destruction of Hellgate before we talk about the Hussar. But so this was a navigational map by the Coast Guard used in 1851. You can see just how many land masses there were jutting into the East River, going, again, causing hazards to navigation. I'm just going to ask again that if you're muted, could you mind staying muted, please? It's a little bit distracting with the noises to go on. Thank you. So by 1850, it was decided that they were going to start breaking up Hellgate. And it was a massive interior military project that was first brought up Again, here's Hellgate right before they are going to break it up. And this is the man who was responsible for the first breaking up of Hellgate. His name was Benjamin Malford. He was an engineer who specialized in underwater blasting. So he actually had developed torpedoes that were used by the Union naval forces during the American Civil War. And he was a French engineer. He was the first person to successfully clear the passage, although unfortunately his technique sort of brought hazard onto the people who were doing it. Congress initially refused to pay for the work, so the city of New York and Malford went to raise money from those sort of higher echelons of New York to do this process of the beginning of the removal of Hellgate. I say the beginning because this process will continue up until 1917. So what you see here, this is a depiction of the 1852 explosion. Again, Claude Russ describes it. He says the relentless blasting of Hellgate went on until March of 1852 when the law of averages caught up with Malafert. So what he did was he would drop these charges over the rocks of Hellgate. And the problem was he was too close when he was dropping the charges. After placing a 125-pound charge of powder atop a rock, he took what he thought were lead wires and he submerged them as a payout line to the supply boat. And he thought he was safe enough away. But when he touched the wires in the battery terminals in the boat, he blew the other boat clear out of the water that was closer to the rocks and threw himself 50 feet in the air. Of the 5 men who were with him in this first operation, 3 were killed, and Malafert and his assistant were disabled. So again, this was a very, very dangerous task, and they wouldn't attempt to do anything again until the 1870s. So later on, it was decided that instead of dropping charges right on top of a boat, having a boat on top of the rocks, dropping the charges and putting everybody in harm's way, they would create these sort of decks that would drop what looks almost like a diving bell. And in that diving bell, you drill the rocks into the rocks and drop the explosives in. And the explosives would be detonated way far away from Hellgate itself. And this was the way to go. I just dropped this in because I love Eliza Greatorex. She's one of the great early New York illustrators who did many beautiful illustrations of New York for, I think, over 40 years of her life. They did a show of hers a couple of years ago. She does these beautiful sketches, and this is the old Hellgate Ferry from 1869. So this is in between the period of the first explosion and the second explosion, which will be the largest explosion to be created by man until the A-bomb. Hellgate in 1879. So here you go. Again, this is less of a bucolic depiction of Hellgate, more of look at the way those waters are churning. Look at the way the boats are sort of bobbing up and down amongst these hazardous rocks. I just found so many great images of Hellgate, and I had to choose which ones. There are 10 that didn't make it in, but they're so beautiful. So this is General George Newton, and General George Newton from the Union Army, now part of the American Army. We now have the Civil War has passed at this point. General George Newton is now in charge of getting rid of the largest hazard to navigation in the Hellgate consortium of land masses, which is Flood Rock. And Flood Rock, here you'll see what he does is he creates cofferdams in the middle of the East River. And then he drills tunnels under into the rocks themselves to plant the explosives. So men were working under there for months, drilling holes into the base of these rocks, planting the explosives. And again, this was a massive, massive undertaking. So this is a plan of all of the tunnels that were dug under Flood Rock to explode it. It took 9 years in total to get everything ready for this. They had 15,000 holes drilled in the ceilings for the explosive charges and 280,000 pounds of explosive mixture, plus 5,000 pounds of dynamite were required for the demolition job. of the 50,000 charges, only 3,000 of them were connected to wires. The other would go off sympathetically, meaning once you charge the 3,000, the rest of the 50,000 would go off after the detonations. So you're, again, trying to do this as safely as possible as you are creating, again, the largest man-made explosion in human history at this point. And here is a photo of the event. It took place on October 10th, 1885. For those of you who know anything about the destruction of Hellgate, you know that Miss Mary Newton, who was the daughter of General Newton, stood at Hallett's Point and turned the key that ignited all of the bombs and set them off all together. And this was basically a camera that got the shot immediately after. It was said that the event was viewed by 50,000 spectators and over 100 cameras at the time. That's a lot of cameras in the 1870s. This is still fairly new and expensive technology for people. But again, everybody knew what was coming. This was well announced, it was well publicized, and people wanted to see it. And again, it was the greatest single explosion ever produced by man at that point. This was the cover of the New York Sun on October 11th. The whole front cover was devoted to the explosion of Flood Rock and the breaking up of Hellgate that day. It was considered to be quite an engineering marvel by a human being at that time, or a team of human beings at that time. This was the New York Times photo at the time of the explosion, and the New York Times reported this: a deep rumble, then a dull boom, like the smothering bursting of 100 mighty guns, far away beyond the blue horizon, rolled across the river. Up, up, and still up into the frightening air soared a great, ghastly, writhing wall of white and silver and gray. 50 gigantic geysers linked together by shivering, twisting masses of spray soared upwards, their shining pinnacles, with dome-like summits, looming like shattered floods of molten silver against the azure sky. It was said that this explosion could be heard and felt 60 miles away in every direction. Pretty crazy. Now, that was not the end of the work. Later on during World War I, they wanted to, as you could see here, again, from this Times article, sort of shave off this conglomeration of rocks here at the base of Ward's Island to open up the channels for naval warships that were going to be involved in the war effort in World War I. It was, as you could see, the cost of $7 million, and the battle was whether or not the government would pay for this. Indeed, it would, and indeed, those rocks would be shaved off, including, I don't know if you could see it, it's very tiny. You see pot rock right there. We're going to talk about pot rock in the first wreck in a minute and a half. It's very important to the first wreck. Here is a modern satellite view of the Hellgate area. The only remnant landmass of Hellgate is Mill Rock, which you can see right there. And interesting, Mill Rock had sort of an interesting sort of life. In 1701, a gentleman by the name of John Marsh built a mill on what was two separate islands, the greater of the two, called Great Mill Rock, and there was Little Mill Rock. During the War of 1812, which is depicted here, there was the War Department built a blockhouse with two cannons on Mill Rock as an attempt to fortify the river and the entryway up towards the Bronx. It was also intended to be sort of a way to defend New York Harbor if ships were coming from the Long Island Sound down into New York Harbor as well. The island was then squatted by a man by the name of Sandy Gibson, who operated a farm there for over 50 years, 1840 to 1898. And then in the early 1900s, it was sort of decided the city was going to sell Mill Rock. And by the 1930s, we have a very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed young parks commissioner by the name of Robert Moses, who I'm sure you're all very familiar with, who did not want the city to sell the island to private enterprise because he feared that they would put billboards on it to sell things. So the Parks Department actually took over Mill Rock, and it still runs Mill Rock today. Mill Rock has no dock at the moment. The dock is rotting away, which you can see right here. So there is no public access as of yet. I don't know if there ever will be. It does come up on talks when the Parks Department talks about, again, North Brother Island, South Brother Island, Mill Rock. Are we going to be able to provide access to these places, and usually it gets tabled, mainly because of the expense of building stable piers to get people onto the island. And so there it is. So there is sort of the whole lead up to the gateway to the Bronx, which is the Hell Gate, as you see here. As you can see, the East Bronx and the two brothers sort of stretching out beyond Hell Gate. And now we will get into the shipwrecks. And the first one, we're going to go chronologically. The first one is the HMS Hussar from 1780, which is depicted here off the coast of Portugal. The HMS Hussar was a 28-gun, 6th-rate Mermaid-class frigate of the British Royal Navy. It was built on the Thames in 1763. It's about 114 feet long, about 35 feet wide, and could house a crew of over 100 people. Before it came to America, it fought in minor sea battles off the coast of Ireland and Portugal, and it was dispatched in November of 1780 to fight the colonists as part of a 100-ship, what was known as the Cork Fleet, I believe because it left from Cork. So when it came over, it was under the command of this admiral, Sir George Bridges Rodney. And it was about 20 ships or so. And when he got to New York, now everybody coming over for the revolution on the British side came to New York first, mainly because New York was the garrison for the British. We were an occupied city. It's where the base of all military operations were at the time. So George comes in. He decides that the Navy is really needed in the South because we're in 1780. We're 3 years away from the revolution ending, and most of the theater has moved south. But one of the ships, the Hussar, had the payroll, the back payroll, by the way, for the Redcoats who were here. And he orders that ship to stay behind and basically hide itself in Long Island. It's decided at that point. Now, let's go. Here's the captain on November 23rd, 1780, against his pilot's better judgment. The captain, Charles Pole, decided to sail through the East River up at a bad time through the treacherous waters of Hell Gate. They said either wait or spend the time and go around the south coast of Long Island, around Montauk, and come back up, which a lot of ships did, even though it took a very long time. But they felt safer in spending the time rather than risking the vessel. So this is a depiction, again, we're back to Hell Gate, sorry, but this is a depiction of Hell Gate in 1778, so 2 years right before this accident happens. And you can see here, there is a key of all of the things that you are seeing here depicted in this sketch of Hell Gate. You'll notice Morsania, which is number 5. And you'll also notice something number 9 called the pot. And it's hard to see. It's where my cursor is circling around because the 9 itself is very light. And the pot was considered to be one of the most treacherous rocks of Hell Gate because it wasn't always visible. But it rose up high enough that if your ship ran aground of it, which was very possible, you could ruin your hull. So these are 2 depictions of pot rock. As you can see, it's a submerged rock that has sort of an outcropping that immediately lessens the depth of Hell Gate and can really wreck your ship. And guess what? That's what the Hussar came against. Basically, it wound its way into pot rock, trying to avoid it. The bottom of the ship is scraped, and it immediately starts taking on water. Now, the captain at the time was trying to actually ground the ship to get everybody off of it. Now, by the way, besides what was rumored to be £500,000 in back pay for the Redcoats, there were also 30 American prisoners of war on the boat as well. So it's pretty well documented that the British were pretty awful with American POWs at the time, including putting them on prison ships. It's very well known, the prison ships that would sit outside in the Hudson, or of course the prison ship that was outside of Wallabout Bay, where basically they would put hundreds of Continental Army prisoners into these boats to let them basically starve, rot, and get consumed by disease. And that was a lesser problem on the Hussar. They were being transported to actually either the sugar houses at the time or another one of the prison ships, but they were in the hold at the time of the accident. Here's a depiction of, again, basically these starving American soldiers. Some accounts say they were not there, but later on there were divers, well, we'll talk about it, who actually found evidence of the fact that they were there. And of course, here's the treasure. This is what everybody eventually, after the ship sinks, wants to go find. The British Army basically had what is believed to be 600,000 pounds in the George III guinea, which is depicted here. Now, there have been a couple of very exaggerated totals. Some say it was 1 million, some say it was 5 million. And if it was upwards of 5 million, if you account for modern inflation, a coin collector from the New York, interviewed by the Times in 1985, actually said that what the treasure could be upwards of $500 million in worth if somebody found it. And of course, that's going to drive people crazy, because you've got a wreck off the coast of the Bronx with $5.5 million. No, sorry, $500 million in there. Sorry, I'm confusing myself. Now, immediately from the minute that the ship sinks, and again, it takes on water right after it hits Pot Rock, and the captain tries to run it aground, but he keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and eventually, right off of the coast of the Bronx, the ship sinks. The very first attempt to salvage the Hussar was in 1811. A salvage company, which was partially funded by Thomas Jefferson, actually got down there and managed to bring up iron nails and copper, which were considered at that time very valuable. They were used for other ships and shipbuilding, but there was no gold, only nails, other metals, and a barrel of butter, interestingly enough, which was fairly well preserved because of the depth of the water. Later on, there was a very famous diver who had sort of perfected dive suit technology. His name was Charles Pratt. And Charles Pratt, over the course of 13 years, would dive the Hussar wreck over 6 times, I believe, and he was able to salvage numerous artifacts from the boat. He raised cannons and cannonballs, swords, wine, and he also found human bones still in shackles, which again lends credence to the idea that there were American prisoners in the hold of the ship. Now, Pratt, as he got older, could dive less. He had thought that the coins were probably, or the hoard of coins were deeper in the hold, which was under the muck. He couldn't spend enough time down there. He did find gold coins, but it was believed to be probably from the pockets of the seamen themselves, not from the hoard. And the whole enterprise was abandoned after he grew ill and passed away. Interestingly enough, one of the cannons that he exhumed from the Hussar was donated later on in its life to the Central Park Conservancy. The Central Park Conservancy mounted it, and funny enough, in 2013, some park workers were very surprised to find that the cannon was still loaded with gunpowder and a cannonball in it, and the NYPD bomb squad was called in to defuse it, which is nuts, I think. But again, part of the mystery and sort of legacy of the Hussar continues even further with this gentleman, whose name is Joseph Governorale, a Bronx native who was a real estate agent and an actor, and by his own proclamation, a treasure salvager. And he went by the stage name known as Joey Treasures, and considered himself one of the foremost modern seekers of the Hussar's fortune. In 2013, Governorale claimed to have recorded footage of the Hussar wreck off of the Tiffany Street Pier, but it wasn't ever established whether or not that was truly the Hussar, whether or not that location was true. He also had claimed to salvage a British beer pitcher and 1 gold coin as well, which he used, by the way. This is where he claims the wreckage of the Hussar would be today. Now, he used that beer pitcher and 1 gold coin to get an investor by the name of James Keyes, who pitched in $100,000 to help Governor Raleigh not only put together a team to go diving, but also put together a pitch pilot for Nat Geo to publicize his exploits. And what you see here is a freeze frame of the sizzle reel of Governor Raleigh's attempt at selling Nat Geo on this. Unfortunately, for Governor Raleigh, and obviously here for most of you probably know this, the Tiffany Street Pier in the Bronx, he was sued by his investor when it was found out that the beer pitcher, which he had admitted to, was bought on eBay, as well as the gold coin. So it was not found in the wreck of the Hussar. He didn't really know where the wreck of the Hussar was, although he does believe it's there, and he still does believe that it exists. He just wanted to convince people that it was there so he could fund his expeditions to get there. His last quote on it was in 2021 after a judge found in favor of Keyes, the investor. He said, quote, "I will bring the Hussar to the surface. I will vindicate the borough of the Bronx." He even wrote to the judge in the case, "I'm just a poor kid from the Bronx, and a lot of people told me I'd never amount to anything, but I kept the vision." He continues on by saying, like the film Samson and Delilah, when he's blind and makes his way to the pillars, the whole Colosseum is laughing at him. And then you hear the crack of the stone, and the Colosseum goes stone quiet, as it will be when CNN announces to the world that the poor kid from the Bronx, Joseph Governor Raleigh, has discovered and brought to the surface the remains of the shipwrecked HMS Hussar. So he still believes to this day that it's there and that he can do it. Now, there is a 6-minute sizzle reel on YouTube, which you can see. I did include it. One of the reasons why I think Nat Geo didn't pick it up even when they thought he was for real is the fact that he drops F-bombs all the time. Even if you watch the sizzle reel itself, it's F this, F that. And again, I'm no shrinking violet or prude when it comes to cursing, but I usually don't go to major networks to try to pitch them an idea and have me cursing and yelling at my crew that this is the wreck. One of the things, let's see if it loads up. Oh, no, it didn't. All right, I'll put the link to the video in the chat at the end of the presentation because it is sort of interesting to see how much of a ham he is. And you now knowing what you know could see it's sort of all played up, but he definitely was obsessed. And the Hussar still remains a mystery to many people, most likely as salvagers and divers and also historians think that the Hussar, what's ever left of it, has probably scattered so far about because of the current that it would be almost impossible to locate it directly these days. The next wreck that we will talk about is the Holland III, which was sunk in 1883. This is actually a photo of the Fenian Ram, which was a sister boat built at the same time. And this was one of the U.S. Navy's first proto-submarines. And it was developed by this man, John Philip Holland. He was an Irish engineer who had developed the first viable submarine technology to be commissioned by the U.S. Navy. Many people had come up with the idea of a submarine all the way back to the colonial era, the Turtle. Also, it was thought that Robert Fulton, who created a viable steam engine for boats, also created a one-man submarine for Napoleon. But it was John Philip Holland who came up with something viable enough for the U.S. Army to use. And then later, actually, the first Royal Navy, which is kind of ironic considering the story I'm about to tell you. But Holland emigrated to the United States in 1873. He initially worked for an engineering firm and in that time started putting together designs that he wanted to sell to the U.S. Navy. At that time, he also gets the attention of the Fenian Brotherhood. Many of you may know the Fenian Brotherhood. They were an Irish Republican organization which was founded in the United States in 1858 and was a sort of an offshoot of the IRB, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and were commonly known in New York as Fenians, and were very well known for their multiple attempts to invade Canada. The whole idea behind the Brotherhood was to fight the British and gain Irish Republican independence. This image on the right side is actually done by Collier and Ives of the Fenian Brotherhood and the idea of sort of liberty fighting for the Irish at the time. And the Fenian Brotherhood were very interested in buying one of Holland's boats to use against Britain in the freeing of the Irish Republic, or the creation of the Irish Republic. This was a sketch of the Holland #1, which was not bought by the Navy. The Navy looked at this and said, no, this isn't going to do. Two reasons. One of it is it almost looks like an underwater kayak. It only fits one man in it. And the idea was not to propel anything from the boat, from the submarine, but actually put a torpedo on top of the submarine, go under an enemy vessel, and attach the torpedo under the boat. And the Navy said, no, there's too many ways that can go wrong. Build us something that we can actually fire something from the submarine itself. And that's what Holland did. He would not be undone. He said, all right, give me a minute, I'll come back, or give me a year or so. And he came back, and this was his new design for what was known as the Holland III and the Fenian Ram. Now, at that point, the Fenians had commissioned him to create the Fenian, what they called the Fenian Ram, for their purposes. And he said, well, great, I will use that money to create a prototype for the Navy and one for the Fenians themselves. And this one was a lot larger. It was 31 feet long, about 6 feet in diameter. It could go to a depth of 59 feet, whereas the other one could only go to, I think, 20 or so. It was almost useless. And this one had a complement of 3 men. It could house an operator, an engineer, and most importantly, a gunner. And it did have an armament. It did have a pneumatic gun, which could fire a torpedo at a ship, which was very important to both the Fenians and the U.S. Navy. Here was a picture of the operator's chair of this submarine. This is also the Brayton Ready motor expander cylinder, which, again, the motor itself was also considered to be a very big part of the cell of this, there we go. Of this boat, because submarines at that point were sort of propelled almost by human endeavor, not by engines themselves. And this was now its own independent engine, which would guide the submarine itself. This was launched in 1881, the Fenian Ram, and it was launched. That's a picture of Holland himself. He would actually drive the boat, launch the boat himself, and test fired the gun using dummy projectiles. And really, he was the only one who knew how to drive the boat and operate it. And there was a skirmish that happened. The Fenians did not pay Holland for his work, but they wanted the boat. They said they didn't have the funds, but they'd get them eventually. And Holland said, I'm not giving it to you. I'm not giving it to you till you pay me. And the Fenians said, okay, well then guess what? We're going to steal it. So what happens is the Ram and the Holland III, both of the boats, were in the Morris Canal Basin on the Hudson River in Jersey City. The Brotherhood had their own surface boat, which they tied the Ram to the back of, and then on the back of the Ram was the Fenian III. They stole both of the boats and dragged them up the East River in the middle of the night. So what happened is they get through Hellgate, and of course Hellgate's tough. They navigate it, but the both of the submarines are swishing around behind the boat. Now, the Fenian Ram does not take on water, but through the turret, actually, the Holland III does start taking on water, enough so that it starts dragging the Ram behind it, and then it starts sinking. Now, luckily for the Ram, the rope between the Fenian Ram and the Holland III breaks, and the Holland III, right somewhere between Whitestone Point, right as they cleared Old Ferry Point, sinks to the bottom of the East River in about 110 feet of water, and is left there never to be recovered. As a matter of fact, about 10 or so years ago, the National Underwater and Marine Agency attempted to exhume the Holland III. They attempted to find it, but they couldn't. My guess is that, again, it was probably moved with the tide, or probably because it was cast iron, probably rusted out and is not much of anything at this point. The Finian 3, I'm sorry, the Finian Ram made it to New Haven, which is where they were going to park the boat for its use to bring over to Europe. And once it got to New Haven, they were a little fuggy, by the way, said to Holland, okay, we've got the boat, show us how to use it. And Holland said, no, I'm not. You didn't pay me. I don't care if you stole the boat. I don't care what happens. I'm not giving you the knowledge to drive it. And it sits in New Haven for a couple of years. Actually, there it is out in the field. Here it is in a shed in New Haven for a couple of years before it actually, again, gets exhumed and used as a fundraiser at Madison Square Garden to do fundraising for the Finian Brotherhood. And then eventually it gets restored, and you could see it today in a museum at Paterson, New Jersey, because it was in Paterson, New Jersey, where Holland himself lived and worked. So for those of you who may be familiar with northern New Jersey, you may know Paterson is considered to be a depressed urban center in northern New Jersey. I grew up about 20 minutes north of Paterson, and Paterson takes great pride in this boat, which you can still see. And again, the Holland 3 is at the bottom of the East River somewhere. Fortunately, no loss of life in that wreck, obviously. Quite the opposite, a tragic loss of life, is the General Slocum in 1904, which I'm sure very few of you are strangers to this story. It is one of the most tragic losses of life in New York City history. And what is amazing about the story for me, again, the tragic loss of life, but also the life of the boat, which a lot of people don't know. This boat was cursed from the minute that it was built, and it even had a life after the accident, which is staggering to me. This is a actual beautiful sepia-toned postcard of the General Slocum rounding Pier A and the Battery. It was built in 1891 and owned by a company known as the Knickerbocker Steamboat Company. Itself was made of beautiful white oak, locust, and yellow pine. It was licensed to legally carry 2,500 passengers. It would often carry more than that, though. Not on the day of the accident, to be fair, but was known to carry many more than 2,500, because that's how many life preservers they had on the boat. It was given its name, the General Slocum, after a Civil War general and New York Congressman Henry Warner Slocum. As you could see from this image, it was a side wheel boat. Each side wheel, there were two of them, had 26 paddles, 31 feet in diameter. Her maximum speed was 16 knots. That will actually become important when the accident occurs. It could hold about a crew of 22, including a captain and 2 pilots. And it operated as an excursion vessel for 13 years and mainly did runs to the Rockaways in Coney Island from Lower Manhattan. That's what it really specialized in. Now, here, I'm just going to give you a laundry list of things that happened to this boat before the tragedy in North Brother Island. 4 months after launching, she runs aground and off the Rockaways, and tugboats had to pull her free. Okay, that's not so bad, but again, not a great start. A number of incidences had occurred in 1894, that year itself, on July 29th, after returning from Rockaway with 4,700 passengers, almost double, actually it was double of what she could carry. It struck a sandbar with enough force that it knocked out her electrical generator. The very next month, the Slocum ran aground off Coney Island during a storm. Passengers had to be transferred to another ship to get off of it. September of 1894, the Slocum had collided with a tug in the East River, with the Slocum sustaining actually substantial damage to her steering. Later on in 1898, the Slocum was in another collision and collided with the steamship Amelia near Battery Park, but it keeps going. And this one is probably the craziest. In August of 1901, The boat was carrying 900 intoxicated anarchists from Paterson, New Jersey. Some of the passengers started to riot and tried to take control of the vessel. The crew actually fought back and kept the vessel for themselves. The captain, who is the captain who will be involved, Van Schaik is his name, in the accident we will talk about momentarily, was able to dock the boat at the Old Slip Pier, which is right in front of the first precinct, and the police came on board and took 17 men into custody. But I'm not done yet. In June of 1902, the Slocum ran aground with 400 passengers aboard. The vessel was unable to be freed immediately, and the passengers had to camp out overnight while the ship remained stuck. So that's her safety record, her accident record before 1904. Tragically, on June 15th of 1904, the Slocum was chartered by St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church for $350. This church, which is pictured here today, it is no longer a Lutheran church. It's actually the 6th Street Community Synagogue. It was in the heart of Kleine Deutschland, Little Germany. And this Lutheran church was almost 100% made up of German immigrants. And for 17 years, they would go in June for an annual picnic on the North Shore of Long Island. And it was the Slocum's job to take them there. It was at a place called Locust Grove, which was a picnic area in Eaton's Neck, Long Island. Now, this is rumored to be this picture, and it's almost tragic if this is the case, rumored to be a photo of the Slocum as it's pulling away from the East 3rd Street Pier in Lower Manhattan on June 15th, the day that the accident happened. And it was reported that before the accident, as you can see here, people are obviously stuffed to the gills on the boat. It's a beautiful day. Many children are on board waiting to go to this picnic. A German band had played on the deck. It said that adults sang along and children danced and were really excited. At about 10 o'clock, they cast the lines off. The engine, the bell rang in the engine room, and it was reported to Captain William von Schaik, who was the captain of the boat for years, that they had collected nearly 1,000 tickets for this excursion, but that did not include 300 children under the age of 10 who did not require tickets. So you've got mainly women, mothers, who are on board with their very young children, a lot of whom are infants and newborns. Tragically, as the ship reached 97th Street, it was rumored that there had been a fire even before that. So it was said that a 12-year-old had come up to the bridge and tried to tell the captain that there was a fire, but he was shushed away basically as a prankster, saying, basically get out of here. But once they reached 97th Street, some of the crew from the lower decks actually saw the puffs of smoke through the floorboards, and they ran down to the cabin. It was believed that the fire was started by a haphazard match that was lit, most likely for a cigar or a pipe, on board and tossed into one of the lower front cabins, which had highly flammable paint in it. Once the crew discovered the fire, it was, as they had said, quote, a blaze that could not be conquered and would be almost like putting out hell itself, which is, again, fitting because they are in Hellgate at this point. So Captain Van Schaik is now trying to figure out what to do with a vessel that is now bursting into flame within seconds. Onlookers in Manhattan had reported that they could see the flames. They shouted for the captain to dock immediately. But Van Schaik had actually feared that his steering gear was compromised and that the strong currents would actually leave the Slocum helpless in the middle of the river. What he wanted to do was push forward as much as he could. He was also told by a tug captain that, if you go back and look at this, that there were piers on 133rd Street in the Bronx, but there were two differing reports, one of which was saying that they were lumber piers and they were afraid that the lumber was going to ignite if he docked there. Another report said that they were actually oil tanks, and of course that would have been even more of a disaster, not only for the boat, but for the surrounding neighborhood. So what Van Schaik decided to do was put the boat full throttle, 16 knots, and keep going forward. He had intended to actually do what he said he was going to do, which was beach the boat off of North Brother Island close enough so that people could jump off and be safe. But here was the problem. The problem was when he put the boat full throttle, there was a north wind, and the north wind with the speed of the boat actually fanned the flames and caused it to get worse. And this was, again, at this point, the most of the ship was a tinderbox and inferno. Mothers were screaming. People were jumping off the sides, trying to figure out whether or not they could survive or get burned alive. Since it was mostly women on the boat, they were in very, very heavy clothes, as women in the early 1900s were wont to wear, which basically made these women almost sink like rocks to the bottom of the river and die. Very, very tragic. Now, at the time, the crew, once the fire had started, attempted to distribute life jackets, but found that the life jackets were rotten, mainly used with or lined with cork. The cork had rotten into almost dust, and they were useless. Luckily for those who did survive, which were not many, boats all along the East River sped to try to save the people who were jumping off the boat. The problem was nobody really knew how to swim. Heavy clothes were sinking them very quickly. Also, the amount of people in the water flailing around were dragging other people down with them as well, which was also unfortunate. One man got actually caught in the side panel, unfortunately, which was, you have to remember, still moving because the boat is still moving as people are jumping off of it on its way to North Brother Island. It was reported that a 12-year-old boy had shimmied up the ship's flagstaff at the bow and hung there until the heat became too great and just dropped into the flames. Women were jumping into the water with their children. One woman basically hurled herself overboard. She gave birth on the boat in the mayhem and basically jumped overboard with her newborn child, and they both died. I mean, this is only a fraction of the horror that had resulted from this ship. Captain Van Schaik actually stayed with the ship until the end. He did get it to North Brother Island, about 20 or so feet off the shore. It said his feet were burned and blistered from the heat below. And North Brother Island jumped right into emergency mode when they got there, because luckily at the time, although North Brother Island is abandoned today, it was not then. It was the site of Riverside Hospital, where typhoid and other contagious diseases were being treated and people were being quarantined for. And the staff had spotted the flames immediately. The island's fire whistle blew and dozens of rescuers moved to the shore. It was said that nurses were gathering debris and throwing it out to people to try to get them to the shore. Nurses also dove into the water to get badly burned passengers onto the shore to safety, but nobody could get close enough to the boat because the blaze from the flames was so hot at that point. This is, oh, and there's, sorry, I should have progressed the slide. There's an image of rescue workers on North Brother Island getting people, but also tragically collecting bodies and placing them either in the grass or, as you see here, tragically on the shore. It was also reported that orphan children of 3, 4, 5, 6 years old were milling about the beach dazed, having almost no idea what happened to them. This all took place in the matter of 20 minutes, which is absolutely crazy to think of. These poor children would have to wait for hours until family could come to collect them, if they, again, didn't have any parents who had survived. The aftermath of the Slocum was devastating, not only to the people who were involved in it, but to the whole entire Kleine Deutschland. It decimated families. Now, because this was a work day and it was mainly women and children, hundreds of working German immigrant men came home that night and didn't have families anymore. The Knickerbocker steamship or steamboat company was actually taken to court. Van Schaik himself, who's you can see here at this top image, he was the only one who was criminally indicted. In the process of getting off the boat and staying with the ship, he was blinded and crippled. He could no longer use his feet. His eyesight was blinded by the fire itself. He would face criminal charges for ship's unpreparedness and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He'd only served 4. President William Taft would pardon him in 1912 on Christmas Day. Teddy Roosevelt actually was presented with the papers to pardon him, but Roosevelt refused and said no. 8 people from the Knickerbocker Steamship Company were indicted. That included the captain, as we talked about, 2 inspectors, the president, the secretary, the treasurer, and the commodore of the company. But the steamship company only had to pay a relatively small fine for what had happened. And the only reason why they had to pay that fine is because it was revealed during the court case that they had intentionally falsified safety inspection records, saying that basically the life preservers were in working order when it was clear they were not. The disaster itself obviously spurned on federal and state regulation to improve emergency equipment on passenger ships, except, as you know, in 1912, when one of the greatest, or not the greatest, maritime disaster, the Titanic, happens, it is found that the White Star Company is also doing similar cost cutting and not having enough lifeboats for the people that were on the Titanic. So this is a story that plays out over and over again. And here is the delisted Slocum off North Brother Island, which shockingly enough will have a future. But before that, this is the New York World, which was Pulitzer's paper. On the day, lists of Slocum's dead may reach 1,000. Actually, it will reach 1,021, mainly women and children. And it is the worst loss of civilian life in New York City until September 11th, 2001. And as you can see, all of the front page was devoted to the tragedy. Here was a political cartoon. So of the deaths, there were 895 identified dead. 2 of those were crew. Missing and unidentified were 62 people. 175 people were injured, and 228 were uninjured and survived. And that includes 23 crew members. So interestingly enough, on a boat with roughly a little under 30 crew, the crew definitely knew how to save themselves and did a fairly good job in the process. But only roughly 228 civilians would survive. This is a shot of one of the many burials of the unidentified General Slocum victims. And again, as I stated, many of these men were suddenly without families, and funerals were held for weeks and weeks, and schoolyards were decimated and quiet because of the death of the children. And many widowers and the families from Kleine Deutschland would move themselves up north to Yorktown, which would then become the second German stronghold in Manhattan at the time, basically abandoning this area because of the pain of the tragedy itself. This is a photo from the day of outside of St. Mark's Lutheran Church, where family and relatives are gathering to hear what's happening, where are the survivors. Interestingly enough, a 10-month-old boy had floated to the shore uninjured, but obviously orphaned, and lay unclaimed at a hospital until his grandmother identified him days later. And this is sort of a happy story with an interesting twist. There was an 11-year-old boy by the name of Willie Kepler on the boat who had joined the excursion without his parents' permission, but he was a fairly good swimmer, and he made his way through the flailing non-swimmers who were basically helping to drown other people by trying to grab onto them. And he didn't want to go home. He was afraid he was going to be in trouble, until the next day he saw his name on the list of the dead, and he thought about his mother's broken heart. So he obviously went home, and he said, instead of a licking and breaking my mother's heart, Mudders, Kepler was quoted as saying, "I was home and my mother only kissed me, and my father gave me $50 for being a good swimmer." You could imagine the relief in the fact that their son, who was on the deceased list, was actually alive. The youngest survivor of the disaster was a 6-month-old by the name of Adela Liebenow. And a year later, Liebenow helped to unveil a memorial statue to the disaster, which had killed her 2 sisters that day and permanently disfigured her mother. The New York Times reported, quote, 10,000 persons saw through their tears a baby with a doll tucked under her arm unveil the monument to the unidentified dead of the Slocum disaster yesterday afternoon in the Lutheran Cemetery in Middle Village, Long Island. Adela will die in 2004, and she would have been, at that time, the oldest survivor. And for those of you who know Tompkins Square Park, there was a memorial fountain put in also, I believe it was a year later, with the inscription, "They were Earth's purest children, young and fair." And that is still there to this day. Now, interestingly enough, the coda of the story, the remains of the Slocum were salvaged and rebuilt as a coal barge, rechristened the Maryland. Now, just in case you didn't think that this ship was cursed, the Maryland sank 3 times after she was rebuilt. On the 4th time, she was finally abandoned right off of the Jersey shore, south between, I think it was somewhere between Cape May and Margate. A modern diver believes he found the wreckage, but he had said that it's under so much sand and muck, it's not even worth diving. And of course, that was then the final tragic end of the Slocum, a boat which I would say safely was cursed. Also an interesting coda, Bronx Congressman Jose Serrano had in 2005, a year after the centennial of the disaster, had put together a bill for the General Slocum Memorial Study Act, which directed the Secretary of the Interior, acting through the Director of the National Park Service, to study in Bronx County, New York, the shoreline of the area bounded by 149th Street on the west and Oak Point Rail Yard on the east, including North Brother Island, to evaluate the national significance of the area and suitability of designing it as a unit of the national park system, and in so creating on North Brother Island a memorial to the victims of the Slocum. But I don't think that bill went very far. This is a quick one, but I love Execution Rocks, even though technically it's not in the Bronx. Execution Rocks you can sort of see from City Island, and has a lot of nice little myth and lore to it. There is a picture of Execution Rocks lighthouse. A lot of sort of great tall tale tellers will tell you that Execution Rocks was named because of executions that took place under the British authorities before the American Revolution, who would chain prisoners to the rocks at low tide to be drowned there. There is no real historical evidence that that had happened. There was a serial killer, actually in the same year of this wreck that we're going to talk about, who had claimed to do something very similar off the rocks of Execution Rocks, tying his victims to the rocks to be drowned. Also, before the SS Maine in 1920, there was another wreck in 1903 of the Worcester. The Worcester, which had about 300 passengers on it, became wedged in the rocks, and rescuers had a very tough time saving the passengers from that wreck itself. The lighthouse itself was designed by architect Alexander Paris, who also built Boston St. Paul Cathedral and Quincy Market. The granite for the lighthouse was quarried in Manhattan, most likely somewhere near Roosevelt Island. There was a lot of granite stone that was coming up from Roosevelt, then Blackwell's Island, in 1840. And excavated in the, also stone came from the excavation of the Hotel Continental, which was located at Broadway and 41st Street long before it was Times Square. It was brought out to Long Island Sound by barge, and the granite lighthouse tower went up in 1849. The lighthouse keeper's house came later in 1867 and done in a neoclassical style. And as you can see, for somebody living on Execution Rocks, there's not a lot of breathing room out there. Now, the SS Maine was part of the Fall River Line. In February of 1920, they had a boat, which actually I found out later was probably fully called the State of Maine. And the Fall River Line was a very popular combination steamboat and railroad connection between New York City and Boston that had operated from about 1847 to 1937. And it basically consisted of an idea of you would take a railroad from Boston to Fall River, Massachusetts, which is on the south coast of the state. You would board steamboats and journey through Narragansett Bay and Long Island Sound. Basically, then navigate your way to the Hudson River, where the Fall River line would dock here at the Hudson River dock in Manhattan. And for many years, it was considered to be the preferred route to go between Boston and New York, mainly because the steamers were very, very beautiful. Their interiors were like luxury cruise ships. Obviously, that would wane in the early 20th century as rail was becoming more dependable. But in February of 1920, the city was gripped in a very, very, very deep freeze. And after breaking up heavy ice on its way up through the Bronx, this 310-foot long wooden passenger steamship basically started taking on water. It was en route from New York to Bridgeport, and the captain basically, no passengers on it. There were, some reports say 20 people on it, which were mainly most likely transporting crew. Other reports say 4 people were on it. Nobody lost their lives, but there were a team of horses on it, all of which were rescued as the ship took on water about 100 yards north of Execution Rock. But the problem was the waters were so frozen and it was so cold, and the next day there'd be a major snowstorm, that all of the rescued personnel from the Maine would have to stay at Execution Rocks for 3 days until they could be rescued. The ship itself was actually stripped in situ and burned, and basically a pile of hull rubble and boilers remain still off the coast of Execution Rocks. And there is a star roughly noting Execution Rocks and where the dive was. Now, again, I found this really great video of a dive team that dove the Maine. And I don't know if the video is going to work because the other video didn't work. But again, if it, oh, it is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward it because that intro is a little wordy. We don't really need the intro.
Hello, everybody. This is Captain Dennis of Squalus Marine Divers. Today, we're diving off in New Rochelle, New York, on a charter boat called the Moontide. We're going to be diving a shipwreck called the Maine, which is a steam ferry that got stuck up against these rocks with some ice, and they kind of got into more trouble than they had hoped for, and they had to smash the ship up because it was a hazard of navigation. And you'll see what it looks like at a whopping 11 feet down here today. So we're going to get in and look around and see what we can see. We're going to be very close to the bottom because, like we say here at Squalus Marine Divers, the viz is what it is. Bunch of starfish down here. I wonder if the ship was carrying starfish.
Bad joke.
And our first piece of wreckage. Current's moving a little bit down here, and we've got a little bit of surge, which is making it really sporty. At least to film, anyways. Now, this ship is, right now, we're in 11 feet of water. So we've got a lot of ambient light, which gets a lot of plant growth. And there's also a lot of mussels here. And that's pretty much covering all the wreckage. So it's very difficult to discern what's what. A lot of things that I thought were big stones were actually pieces of ship. Pretty much the whole bottom down here is wreckage. See here, fish like to hide in the wreckage. And there's some big pieces left sticking up all over the place. see on the bottom there, the little bit of orange. Basically, the whole bottom is ship. So there's big flat pieces of steel like this one all over the bottom. Lots of large pieces of the ship just shooting up from the bottom.
All right, I'll leave it there because there's a lot of that. And the music, although peaceful, will sort of lull you to sleep. But again, if you're interested in watching the remaining 5.5 minutes of this, I can certainly give you the link itself. But basically, that is a lot of what you see. So I will end the talk on this note. Execution Rocks was sold, I believe, in 2010 to a Philadelphia nonprofit, which was started and operated by a Philadelphia area couple who since 2010 have turned Execution Rocks into a destination. You could stay there. It's a little bit of they call it a bed and breakfast, but it seems a little bit more sporty, as that diver would say, than that. Very interesting spot. Hold on one second. Excuse me. We at Untapped New York actually did tours with them in 2016. It was very, very interesting, and we'd like to again. Okay, that's my voice telling me I'm done, which is good because I'm done. Excuse me. So, I hope that you enjoyed the talk. Any questions? Happy to entertain, but I am going to douse some tea for the moment to get my my voice back. Oh, thank you.
Justin, certainly a bang-up job. There was just so much information. I'm taking notes here too, and I'm glad we recorded it, so we can definitely go back and view it and take a look at it. But certainly a good presentation, excellent presentation, especially with Hellgate and those photos and the fact that they were exploding much of the rock underneath it, underneath the waters, in order to smooth it out to make it easier for ships to pass through. But definitely fantastic job. Any questions, any particulars that you may have about any of the shipwrecks?
Actually, I do have one question for you that's not
Sure.
related to the shipwrecks that we talked about.
More of a mystery that may be able to help solve.
Ooh.
So I lived in Edgewater most of my childhood, and many times we've gone on boats between Fort Totten and Fort Schuyler.
Uh-huh.
We would jump off the boat, but closer to Fort Totten, but on direct line between Fort Schuyler, we got chased by the Coast Guard, as rumor has it that there is a sunken ship of some sort that the government does not want anybody to know about. I was wondering if you knew of any type of boat, maybe a German sub or something, that seems to this day is off limits to any type of diving.
It's very interesting that you say that. two reasons why that's interesting. One of which is we are putting together a podcast on main streets in New York City. All the boroughs have main streets, and Edgewater has a main street. So we're talking about the Bronx's main street is in Edgewater. So that is really interesting that you bring the neighborhood up, because I was talking about it this afternoon with the producers. Secondly, I did a lot of work out at Fort Totten for a while, and there are a lot of myths and legends about the waterway between Fort Schuyler and Fort Totten, including many people believe there's a tunnel that connects the two forts, which is, I've been told, absolutely not true. Now, there was a rumor that there was a military vessel sunken somewhere in the area that was very much live with ammunition. That's all I had heard about, but I do have quite a few very nerdy friends at Fort Totten who I will bring this question to for more details, and I, through Rich, will tell you what I find out, because it was a passing note when I had done research for a project there They developed the underwater mine at Fort Totten. And so they were testing it quite a bit. There was a belief that it may have gone off and during testing and actually wrecked a boat, which they might be hiding. I don't know why that would be off limits now, because we're talking about the 1890s at this point, but I'll look into it. It sounds right up my alley. So
I do have another second question.
sure.
In the waters of the East River between the Throgs Neck and the Whitestone Bridge, apparently there was a German boat of some sort that either sunk or was captured. There is a little bit on the internet I tried to find for tonight's meeting, but I couldn't find it. I do only know there's only one, maybe two articles that reference it. Do you know of any knowledge of that? It's actually off Silver Beach area.
Okay. Was this was it a U-boat? Was it
I believe so. I believe so.
So there was a rumor that, I mean, it wasn't a rumor. There was an actual infiltration by German agents through a small fleet of U-boats. It was called Operation Drumbeat, that came over the Atlantic. They used, strangely enough, 1939 World's Fair maps to navigate the waters. Now, there was a report that one of them got caught up in Hellgate and was possibly wrecked. But that was all I know about it, and I don't know if it was ever claimed or salvaged. But I'll look into that too, because they were definitely here. They were arrested. They tried to infiltrate Grand Central Terminal, and they were staying in Midtown Manhattan. But one of them came in through Hellgate, and the rest of them parked themselves, I believe, off of Eastern Long Island, and the men came in on the railroad. So I don't know what happened to that other boat, but I'll go looking. But I think there is a scarce amount of information about it. I think you're right.
Yep. Thank you.
Howard, you had a question?
Yes, there was when you crossed one of the bridges, I think it was the Throgs Neck, and you look to your right, there was a cove, and you could see the wreckage of a boat. What was that?
Good question. I'm not sure. So like all of the boroughs, basically Staten Island, Brooklyn, I don't know about Queens, and the Bronx. I mean, there are boat graveyards, and there are a lot of unidentified boats off the coast of the boroughs. I'm not sure what that is. I'll have to look deeper into it, but
Okay, it was there for a number of years, and now I don't see it anymore. And I believe it was you saw it off the Whitestone Bridge, but it could have been the Throgs Neck. And
in between.
Maybe. But I remember every time I go over the bridge, I look for it. And I was a boater for a number of years. I stopped in 2019, and I would go through Hell's Gate all the time. And most of the time it wasn't bad, but once I had the misfortune of going through on one engine, and it was actually pretty hairy. So, going from experience, I wasn't an advanced boater, but it was pretty hairy going through on one engine. So it was a little dangerous.
yeah.
We've done it also, and the current rips through there. And I can imagine years ago, before they blasted all those rocks, how the current was focused, and the ships probably just rode the current. It's crazy. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the advice that old time mariners had for Hellgate was, go when the tide is low, actually, because it's the slowest, and also you can see everything. Because when the tide's high, a lot of those rocks were covered, and if you deviated by only even a foot or two, it could be the end of the boat. I mean, this was before they blasted it, but Yeah, now, I mean, Hellgate is much easier to navigate, much more dependable, but it's hard. My uncle went through it a couple of times on his boat. And I remember as a kid we went through it, and you feel it. You basically feel the boat bucking against it. And if you don't have your wits about you, you can end up on the shore very quickly. But it was it's still an exciting ride for sure.
Anybody
Do
else?
they still have the prison boat there?
Where?
When you go through Hell's Gate on, I guess,
Off Hunts Point.
yeah, there was a correction facility there.
Yes,
Oh,
it is
yeah.
still there. It is
It
still
is,
there.
yeah.
The only reason why I know that because my company has a warehouse not too far from there. So it is still there and they're actually planning on closing it at the end of this year.
Yes.
I remember seeing them playing basketball on it.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the map. Was this boat? Was it like a barge? Was it a flat barge?
No, it's huge. It's 3 stories. I think they
Yeah,
made
it
it
was
into a
part
pool
of-
at one point.
I think it was part of Rikers Island.
Oh no. I'm sorry, not the prison boat. The wreck off the Throgsneck.
Oh yeah, that's right by. Geez, when you go over the Whitestone Bridge, the Throgsneck Bridge, it's no, the Whitestone. It's right by Bronx River.
Yeah.
Coming from Manhattan, it was on the left. It looked
Yeah, I've
like
seen
it was in a cove, and
Yeah.
it was right in the middle for many, many years.
Okay. I think I see it. All right. I'll
And there's also another one when you cross the bridge on Shore Drive towards City Island. In that little bay going up the Hutchinson River, there's also another derelict that we explored with our kayaks one time.
Yeah.
Similar boat.
Well, and I mean, City Island has, I mean, you could do a whole talk on just boats that wreck near City Island. The reason why I chose, because there are dozens of them, but the reason why I chose these is I think these were just the most significant for the borough. But there is a whole list of City Island wrecks as well, up until modern times. So
You know, also, I remember once going south, coming out of Hell's Gate, going around the marker. And it's a number of years ago, so my memory is not that sharp on it. But heading south to Manhattan, the water was extremely rough, even rougher than Hell's Gate. And I remember saying, wow, I couldn't believe it. You know, there were stiff currents and huge waves.
yeah, for sure. I mean, and that's why, again, it's almost impossible to dive these. You know, even in that little video I showed you, that guy had said it was sporty. And that's just constant. That's, you know, that's why, again, these people who are trying to find the Huser or any of these older ones, I am sure they have been so scattered about the floor have disintegrated because they're just constantly getting battered by this intense current. That's almost, you know, constant. It's never not there. But
Can't they pick them out with sonar and whatever else they use
I
today?
think, well, they've been trying. I mean, again, there was a modern attempt to dive the Holland 3, mainly because of the military significance of it. They wanted to exhume it, but it costs a lot of money to do it. And if they don't get it right the first or second or third time, they're accruing all these costs, and basically at some point they give up. You know, they can use sonar, they can try, but again, if it's disintegrated, it's not going to be able to sort of pick up in any meaningful way. And if it's been spread out all over the sea floor, it becomes this, you know, really big, expensive clunker of an initiative that, you know, nobody's really going to pay for. I don't think anybody really, in relation to the Hussar, I don't think anybody really believes that treasure's there, or, you know, that hoard of guineas is underwater. I'm sure if people really thought it was there, they'd have more concerted efforts to find it. But I think everybody thinks what was going to be exhumed of the Hussar has been over the past 200 years. So, well,
Hello?
hello.
Oh, somebody has a question? I just like to say that I grew up in East Harlem across from Randall's Island. And as a kid, we used to go to Randall's Island, and one time we bought a raft and a rope, and so we took turns on the rapids between Randall's Island and Wards Island, and it was very fast rapids on there, and they had rocks. So we just took turns. One guy would pull me in, and then another guy would get on the raft, and they would go down, sort of like a Huckleberry Finn type of thing with us at the time. And so that was some experience. Then in I remember 1985, 86, they had the Bronx Queen. I don't know if you remember that. And he finally sunk in 1988.
Yeah.
I thought he sunk in the Bronx, but he actually sunk somewhere in Long Island.
Yeah. I actually considered putting the Bronx Queen in the talk, but I was like, it's not the Bronx. I want to keep, but yeah, the Bronx Queen was, people dive that one all the time. It's a very popular dive. I don't know why. I guess because it's still it's in one space and it's pretty well preserved underwater. But anybody who dives the area knows the Bronx Queen. It's a big one.
I wrote a couple of times on it. We had a cruise of the Bronx parks, and we went around and up to City Island. We went basically right by the George Washington Bridge. We went one time, but it was a World War II submarine chaser.
Yeah,
and he finally sunk. I think he got it sunk by a tree or something like a telephone pole type of thing, and that's when he sunk in 1988.
There's a house out in Montauk by my mother-in-law, and they have the life ring. It says Bronx Queen. I should have
really?
knocked on their door, but it's hanging out in front of their house. It says Bronx Queen.
Yeah, so it was it has an interesting history because as you mentioned, it was a subway chaser, but then it was converted into a fishing excursion boat. And that's when it sunk in the late 80s. That's what it was. It was on a excursion. I think 2 people died on it. And yeah, but it was not in the Bronx. But again, it's very popular to dive because of the condition of the boat underwater, and also the fact that it's it's spread out. You can clearly identify how the ship broke up and landed on the ground. So a lot of even new divers like to dive it quite a bit. I thought I had found video on a dive of the Bronx Queen. I did. Here, I'll share this YouTube link. Hold on. If it'll come up. Again, these dive videos are very interesting. I've watched quite a few of them, but they're also really strangely relaxing because they put this very relaxing music, and they're underwater, and you just kind of almost get sleepy watching them. But hold on, this is not doing what I want to do. This is 12. It's a 12-minute video. And why isn't it just giving me the link?
Are you able to post the link in the chat and then maybe people could
Yeah,
copy?
for some reason though, the link is not coming up when I hit share. It's because I have my Mac, it's going through, well, let me just let it create the link in mail and I'll cut and paste it. I don't know why it's doing that. It's a pain in the butt. Unless I go in through YouTube.
Right.
Which it's not. Here it is. Okay. Cut and paste that. Okay. The link. Right. The Zoom, here I am. It's like performing surgery. And chat, which is of course not down there. Here it is. Got it. I got it. There it is. Okay. that's the Bronx Queen done.
Took a while.
Yeah, no, that took a long time. Much longer than it should have. I don't know why it went to I'm not sure why my computer did that. Usually you hit share and the copy link comes up, but it wasn't.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions before I give my voice a rest the rest of the night? Thank
Justin,
you.
Thank you. Great job as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad you're feeling better and
Yes, thank you for accommodating me too in this.
certain work. I think it worked out best like this. So it really was good. But again, as I said, one day we're going to get you there live and in person. So
Let's do it. I'm always happiest when I'm up in the Bronx. So
yeah.
get me up there. All right.
Thank you,
Well,
everybody. Again,
yeah.
next month is thank you, Justin. Next month is in Bartow Pell Mansion, Wednesday the 21st. So we'll be there in Bartow Pell. So if you can make it, great. So hope everyone stays well, and we'll see everybody next time. So thank you very much.
Just one
Thank you.
quick question for Justin. Justin, is there an email that you could send out so we could chat, or what's the
Oh, yeah,
best way?
sure. Yeah, here, I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Yep. Please feel free to reach out to me.
Great job. Awesome job.
Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Excellent.
Very enjoyable.
Thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate
Right, to copy the email. So have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everybody.
Take
it. Thank
care.
you.
Good night.
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 Night, everyone.
Good night.
Hey, how you doing, Howie?